The Queen Consort explodes at the royal guard. Moments later, he seizes her priceless necklace for Princess Adela. I have spent 31 years of my life writing down what other people take. I am a clerk. I was a clerk when this began, and I am a clerk now, older, with worse eyes and a better chair. And if you want the truth of what happened in the jewel house of Harrogate that winter, you will not get it from the newspapers of the realm or from the people who were standing in the great gallery when the Queen Consort's voice broke over it like a dropped tray. You will get it from the rolls. You will get it from ink. So let me begin where the ink begins. At 11 minutes past 11 at night, in the third week of a hard December, at a door that had no business being opened. The strong room of the jewel house sits at the bottom of a stair so old the stone has worn into a shallow trough down the middle, the way a riverbed wears. There is one door. It is not a beautiful door. It is a slab of banded steel set into a frame of older iron, and it has two locks that take two different keys, and the keys do not live in the same building, and that is on purpose. On the outer side of that door there is a shallow landing lit by one lamp, and a small desk with a hinged lid, and on the night I am telling you about, there was a man standing beside the desk who had been standing there, without moving in any way I could measure, for 2 hours and 40 minutes. His name was Serjeant Aldous Kerrick. Household Regiment, Sovereign's Escort, and because the crown likes to hang two hats on one nail, he also held a warrant that almost nobody in the palace understood and almost nobody thought about, Sergeant of the Regalia. It is an old office. It sounds decorative. It is not. It means that when a piece of the realm's jewelry leaves its box, a sworn man walks beside it, and when the law wants a hand laid on it, his is the hand the law uses. I was at my desk in the rolls room, one floor up, closing the day's book. I had my coat on. I had a supper waiting that had by then stopped being a supper and become an idea. And then I heard heels on the old stair, quick and hard, and voices. And I did what any clerk of 31 years does when he hears heels on the strong room stair at 11 at night. I picked up a pen and I went down. There were 4 of them on the landing. 2 footmen carrying nothing, which is a strange sight, footmen who have not been given anything to carry. A lady of the bedchamber with her hands folded so tightly the knuckles had gone the color of paper. And in front of them, in a traveling coat with the fur still cold from the courtyard, the Queen Consort Morwenna. She was not shouting, I want that understood. That night she was pleasant. That was the frightening part. I did not know yet that she was frightening, but my hands knew, because I noticed later that I had capped and uncapped my pen 4 times before I said a word. Sergeant, she was saying, open it. I cannot, madam. Kerrick did not move. He had his heels together and his hands at his sides and his eyes on the middle distance in the way of a man who has learned that looking at a person is a kind of conversation and that he was not there to have one, not without the order in due form. It is 11 at night. Yes, madam. Do you imagine I do not know what hour it is? No, madam. She smiled at him then. I saw the smile. It was a good smile. She had a fine face, and she knew exactly what it could do, and she spent it the way a careful woman spends money. The investiture is in 9 days, she said. The dressers must have the piece in hand to fit the collar lining and the clasp. 9 days is nothing. You know it is nothing. Open the door, Sergeant, and I will remember that you were sensible. I cannot, madam. You keep saying that word. It is the true word, madam. That was where I came onto the landing, and she turned and saw me, and something moved behind her eyes, quick as a hand under a table. I bowed. She looked at my pen the way a cat looks at a door that has just closed. Wren, she said, second clerk. You keep the rolls. I do, madam. Then you can tell this man that a queen consort may hold what is hers. Now I will tell you my shame, and I will tell it plainly, because I have had years to be honest about it and I have used them. I did not say what I ought to have said. I did not say, Madam, I would have to look and I do not think it is yours. I said, Madam, the sergeant is quite right about the form. which is the cowardly cousin of the truth. It says I will not open the door, and it does not say and you should not want me to. I hid behind procedure. Kerrick did not hide behind it. He stood in front of it. There is a great difference between those two things, and everything that came afterward hangs on it. Morwenna put her hand into her coat and drew out a folded paper. I remember the sound of it, a stiff, expensive sound. She did not hand it to me. She handed it to him, which was, I think, the first mistake she made in the whole affair, though it would take 3 months to grow teeth. Kerrick took it in his white glove. He read it. He read it twice, and the second reading was slower than the first, and I have thought about that second reading more times than I can count. It was a loan docket. Every kingdom's jewel house has some version of the thing, a printed slip, a description of the piece, an authority, a term of loan, 2 signatures. This one was headed for the winter investiture. It described in the flat language of the trade, *1 collar necklace, 9 principal sapphires, cushion cut in a lattice of brilliants, silver gilt on gold, weight and marks as per roll. Against the line-marked authority it carried the counter-signature of Master Ambrose Field, keeper of the jewel house, my superior, a mild man with a bad chest and a worse son. Against the line marked for the use of, it said, in a hand I would come to know as intimately as my own, Her Majesty the Queen Consort. It is in form, Kerrick said. Then open the door. It is in form on its face, madam. He folded the docket once and held it. I will note an exception. You will what? There is a marginal note against this piece in the rolls, Kerrick said. I do not know what it says. I am not the clerk, but I know the rolls carry a note against it because the box in which it lies is a red box, and a red box means the entry is qualified. I am obliged to say so aloud before the door opens. I have said so. Mr. Wren has heard me. I want you to understand what he had just done, because at the time I did not. He had no power to refuse a docket that was regular on its face. He knew it. He obeyed. But before he obeyed, he stood on that landing at 11 at night and put a splinter of truth into the record. There is a note. I have said there is a note. The clerk heard me say it, and he made sure a pen was present when he did it. He did not fight the order. He built a shelf under it so that when it fell, it would fall in front of witnesses. Morwenna's chin came up half an inch. Note whatever you like, she said. Open the door. He turned to the locks. So did I, because the second key is the clerk's key, and the 2 locks must be turned within the same half-minute or the mechanism sets, and a locksmith must be sent for from the city. We turned them. The door came back on its hinges with the long, soft breath that steel doors make, and the cold air of the strongroom came out at us, dry and faintly metallic, smelling of oil and old velvet. Inside, the boxes sit on iron shelves in ranks, black and red, and every one of them has a number painted on the end in white. Kerrick did not go in. He never went in. That is not the sergeant's part. He stood in the doorway with his back to the dark and his eyes on the landing, and he said, "Box 41, Mr. Wren, if you please." I brought out the red box. There is no honest way to describe what was inside it that does not sound like a jeweler's advertisement, so I will tell you instead what it did to the light. The lamp on that landing was a poor thing, a single flame behind glass. When I lifted the lid, that one poor flame went into the 9 stones and came out of them as 9 separate blues. Not one blue 9, from the near black of a winter sea to something so pale it was almost the color of rain. And the lattice of small diamonds around them took the rest of the light and threw it up onto the underside of the vault so that the ceiling above us moved. The lady of the bedchamber made a small sound. The Collar of 9 Sapphires, old before any of us, made in the reign of a king whose name only clerks remember, remade twice, and carried into the house of Harrogate by a bride who died before I was born. "Give it to me," said Morwenna. "Madam," said Kerrick, "the withdrawal must be entered." "Then enter it." "It must be entered in full, madam. Description, marks, weight, condition, hour, the name of the person receiving, and the signature of the person receiving in her own hand before 2 witnesses. That is the form. It is the same form for you as for the master of the horse and the same as for the king. I watched her calculate. I truly believe that was the moment the whole thing turned, though not one of us knew it, and I do not think even she knew it. She had come at 11 at night precisely, so that there would be no clerk, no scale, no book, no ink. She had expected a sleepy soldier and a docket in form, and a piece of jewelry slid into a velvet bag and up a back stair. Instead there was a scale, there was a book, there was a pen, mine, and there was a man in a red tunic standing in a doorway who intended, with a courtesy so complete it left no crack to get a knife into, to make her sign for it like a saddler taking delivery of leather. "You are very careful, Sergeant," she said. "Yes, madam." "I wonder whether you are careful with everyone." "I am, madam." "We shall see." She put out her hand for the pen. "I have the page still. Not the original. The original went where I will tell you it went. But I have the copy I made 3 days later, and the hand is hers, and it is a beautiful hand, upright and quick. And she wrote her name across that line with the pen held so hard that the nib went through the paper at the final stroke, and the ink starred out on the other side of the sheet like a small blue burst of temper. "Received into my keeping, the Collar of 9 Sapphires, box 41, for the winter investiture and thereafter to be returned. Morwennar." Kerrick watched her sign. When she had finished, he said, "Thank you, madam," and he stepped out of the doorway, and the footman came forward with the case, and the whole party went up the worn stair, and the sound of the heels got smaller, and then there was nobody on that landing but a clerk with his coat on and a soldier with his heels together, and a steel door standing open on a room full of boxes. "You said there was a note," I said. "There is a red box," he said. "I do not read the rolls. That is your office. You might have simply opened the door and gone to bed." He looked at me then, and it was the only time that night his eyes came off the middle distance. He had a face like a fence post, long, weathered, entirely without decoration. He was not a handsome man, and he was not a clever-looking man, and I had walked past him perhaps 400 times in my life without ever wondering what was going on behind that face. "So might you, Mr. Wren," he said. Then he faced front again, and I locked the door, and I went up to the rolls room instead of going home, and I lit my lamp, and I opened the great book at the page for box 41, and I read the marginal note. I read it 4 times. I remember I put my hand flat on the desk, as a man does on the deck of a ship when he feels it move under him. The note was in the hand of my predecessor, a dry old fellow long dead, and it had been entered 11 years earlier, and it was signed and dated and witnessed by 2 names I knew. "This piece is not crown property. It is the personal chattel of Her late Majesty Queen Isolde, held in the jewel house for safekeeping only. By the will of the said Queen, proved and registered, it is devised absolutely to Her Royal Highness the Princess Adela, to be held by her and by her alone, and to pass at her discretion to the daughter of the house in time to come. It is not to be worn, lent, altered, valued for sale, or removed from this house save by the hand of the Princess Adela or upon her written leave." And underneath, in the same dead man's careful script, the sentence that would cost me a great deal of sleep: "Any withdrawal contrary to this note is not a loan, it is a taking." I sat with that book open in front of me for a long time. The palace ticked and settled around me the way old buildings do. Somewhere above me, in a bright room I would never be invited into, a woman was holding a necklace up against her throat in a mirror. And 9 days from then, the whole realm would see her wear it. I went to Master Ambrose Field at 8 the next morning with the roll under my arm and my speech prepared, and I got as far as the second sentence. Field's office was the warmest room in the jewel house because he was a cold man in the physical sense, thin, gray, always with a rug over his knees and a fire going in October. He had been keeper for 19 years. He was not a bad man. I want to be fair to him because he ended better than he began, and there are not many of us who can say that. "Close the door," he said, before I had opened my mouth. "Master Field." I said close the door, Tobias. I closed it. I put the roll on his desk, open at the page, and I turned it round so the marginal note faced him, and I said, "You countersign the docket." He did not look at the page. That is what told me. A man who does not know what is written on a page will look at it. He looked at the fire. "The consort," he said, "has the king's confidence." That is not an answer. It is the only answer there is. He pulled the rug up over his knees, and I saw that his hands were shaking, and I had known him for 11 years, and I had never seen his hands shake. "Do you know what my son owes, Tobias? Do you know the figure?" I did not know the figure myself until a person I had never met came to my house in October and told it to me, very kindly, over tea, and then told me that a keeper's pension is a small thing, and a keeper's dismissal is a large one, and that certain debts can be bought up and held by patient people who never call them in, so long as everybody is sensible. The fire cracked. I stood there with my hand still on the corner of the roll. "So sign the amendment," he said, "and it will be over." "What amendment?" He opened his drawer and took out a printed slip and slid it across the desk without lifting his eyes from the fire. It was a note of correction. It said in the flat trade language that the marginal note against box 41 was * entered in error by a clerk since deceased, the said piece being at all times part of the Crown collection and available to the consort in the ordinary course. There was a line for the keeper's signature. There was a line for the clerk of the rolls. There was a line for a witness. I have been asked since whether I was brave. I was not. I was frightened and my mouth was dry, and I thought about my rooms and my salary and the fact that I have no son and no debts and therefore nothing anybody could buy. That last thought is not courage. That is luck. But luck is a place to stand, and I stood on it. "No," I said. Field closed his eyes. And here is the strange thing, the thing I did not understand until much later. He looked relieved, as if a man drowning had been told that the rope was refused and he could stop pretending to swim. "Then take it to the sergeant," he said. "He will know what to do with it. He always does. God help him." That afternoon I found Kerrick on the outer post at the North Arch, and I told him about the note, and the debts, and the note of correction, standing in front of him in the flat gray light, while tourists went past behind me with their phones up, filming a soldier who appeared to be listening to nothing at all. He heard me out without a flicker. Then he said, "Have you the original docket?" "It is in the file." "Go and look." I went and looked. The file was in the cabinet in the rolls room, in the drawer marked for the current quarter, and the docket was not in it. The staple holes were in the sheet behind it. The docket was gone. I stood in front of that open drawer for a long minute, and then I went back down and told him, and for the first time since I had met the man I saw something in his face, not anger, exactly. Something more like a carpenter finding rot where he expected sound wood, and knowing at once that the whole job has changed. "Then we will need the copy," he said. "I have no copy." "You will make one now, Mr. Wren, of the roll page and of the withdrawal book, and you will make it in ink, and you will sign it and date it, and you will bring it to the Lord Chamberlain's office and get a receipt for it from a clerk who is not in the jewel house. Not a note, a receipt with a number on it. And you?" "I am obliged to file a note of exception," he said, "within 7 days of the withdrawal. It is regulation. I have 4 days left." "Sergeant," I lowered my voice, which was ridiculous, because we were standing in the open under an arch with 100 strangers within 30 feet, and none of them so much as glanced at us. A guard and a man in a black coat are furniture in that place. "If you file that, She will hear of it by supper. Yes, she will end you. She may try, he said. Mr. Wren, do you know what a note of exception is? A form. It is a form, he agreed. It says, I did as I was ordered, and I record that I did not think it was right. That is all it is. It changes nothing. It stops nothing. It is a sentence written by a man who obeyed. He shifted his rifle a half-inch, which for him was practically a shrug. But it is a sentence that exists, and a thing that exists cannot be argued out of existence. It can only be destroyed, and destroying it takes a hand, and a hand can be traced. So they will have to come out into the light to reach it. That is the whole of my strategy, Mr. Wren. I have no other. I am a serjeant. I filed the copy with the Lord Chamberlain's clerks the next morning, and I got my receipt, a green slip with a number on it, and I carried that green slip in my breast pocket for the next 4 months, the way another man might carry a photograph. Kerrick filed his note of exception on the 3rd day. On the 5th day, he was posted to the water gate. You may not know what that means, so I will tell you. The water gate is the oldest entrance to the Harrogate precinct, and it opens onto the river Stair, and nobody has used it in ordinary business for 60 years, and it is 108 paces from any building with a fire in it. It faces east into the wind that comes up the estuary. In December, that wind arrives with ice in it. There is a sentry box the size of an upright coffin with a bench inside that has been broken since before I was born. A man is posted there for 2 hours at a stretch, and it is not a punishment formally, because formally the water gate must be manned, and formally the roster is drawn by lot. Kerrick drew that lot 11 times in 14 days. I went down to see him on the 6th of those days at the end of an afternoon watch. It was sleeting. He had been standing in it for 2 hours. The sleet had built up along the top edge of his bearskin and on the shoulders of his tunic and on the crown of the sentry box behind him, and when he turned his head to acknowledge me, some of it came off him in a small, dry slide. They are trying to make you complain, I said. Yes. If you complain, you have a grievance, and a grievance goes to a board, and a board can find a man difficult. Yes. So you will not complain? No. Sergeant, I was miserable and cold, and I was ashamed of being warm-blooded in front of him. This is absurd. It is a necklace. It is one necklace. Nobody has been hurt. Nobody has been robbed at knife point. It is jewelry asterisk, and you are standing in the sleet. He was quiet long enough that I thought he had decided not to answer me at all. Then he said, my father was a farrier. I waited. He shod horses for a great house, not this one. A house in the north with a park and a lake and a family in it who were kind, the way you are kind to a dog you like. And one winter, a man from that house rode a horse over a stone bridge, and the horse came up lame, and the family said my father had set the shoe wrong, and he had not. He had the record. He kept a book, my father, in a farrier's fist you could hardly read, and in that book was the date and the shoe and the nails and the fee, and he took his book up to the house, and he stood in the hall, and he showed them. And they thanked him, Kerrick said, and they sent him away, and they told the county he had set the shoe wrong, and in 18 months he had no trade, because in a small county a thing said by a great house is a thing that is true. He died with the book still in the drawer. It was all correct. Every line of it was correct. The sleet came off the arch above us in a rattle. The book was right, Mr. Wren. There was simply nobody in that hall obliged to read it. He faced front again. Down the stair the river went by black and fast. There is a book in the jewel house, he said, and this time there is somebody obliged to read it. That is the difference. I intend to make somebody read it. Who? I do not know yet. And until you know. Until I know, said Serjeant Aldous Kerrick, I stand here. 9 days after the strongroom door opened, the winter investiture was held in the great gallery of Harrogate under 900 lamps, and the whole realm watched, because that is what the investiture is for. I was not invited. I watched it on a screen in the rolls room with 2 junior clerks and a pot of tea going cold, and I saw the king come in Alaric, 68 that year, gray, still upright, still with that trick of pausing a half-second before he spoke that made everybody in a room lean an inch toward him. I saw Crown Prince Rowan behind his father's shoulder, young and correct and watchful. I saw the ambassadors and the orders of chivalry and the long, slow business of ribbons and swords. And I saw the Queen Consort Morwenna come down the length of that gallery in silver gray with her chin up and 9 sapphires burning at her throat, and I heard the man commentating say, in the warm voice such men use, "And the consort tonight is wearing the great sapphire collar of the house, a piece not seen in public for a generation, and I think we may say it has found its wearer at last." And one of my junior clerks said, "It's stunning, isn't it, Mr. Wren?" And I said, "Yes." And I sat there with a green receipt in my breast pocket and my hands flat on the table, and I thought about a man standing in the sleet at the water gate, 108 paces from any fire. The collar did not come back. That is the whole of the second act, if you want it in 5 words, but I will give it to you properly, because the way a thing does not come back matters more than the fact of it. The docket said for the winter investiture and thereafter to be returned. The trade rule is 14 days. On the 15th day I sent the ordinary reminder, which is a printed card, and I sent it to the consort's household, and I noted the sending in the book. On the 22nd day I sent the second reminder, which is a letter, and I noted it. On the 30th day the rule requires the keeper to report the piece as asterisk standing in writing to the Lord Chamberlain. Field signed that report. I have wondered ever since whether he understood what he was signing, or whether he simply signed everything I put in front of him by then, the way a man in deep water will grip anything floating. Either way, he signed, and the report went, and the report is number 3318 in the Lord Chamberlain's register for that year, and it is the second thing that exists. That is how you build a case against a person who cannot be accused. You do not accuse them. You send the ordinary cards. You keep the ordinary book. You file the ordinary report on the ordinary day, and you do it exactly as you would for a saddler who has not returned a bridle, and the terrible ordinariness of it is the point, because there is no answer to it. To stop it, somebody must reach out and stop it, and reaching out leaves a mark. She reached out. 6 days after the outstanding report went in, I was summoned to the consort's household, not to her rooms, to a small green sitting room on the first floor with a good fire and a bad painting, where I was received by a smooth, pleasant, exhausted-looking man who was her private secretary and whose name I will not write, because he was punished enough later and he was, I think, the least guilty person in the whole affair. He offered me tea. I took it. My hands were shaking and I did not want them to be seen shaking, and holding a cup is a way to hide that, which is one of the few useful things I have learned in a long career of being frightened of people better dressed than myself. "Mr. Wren," he said, "the collar." "Yes." "There has been a great deal of paper about the collar." "There has been the ordinary paper," I said. "Her Majesty feels, and I put this to you as a kindness, Mr. Wren, because I think you are a decent man in a difficult post. Her Majesty feels that the ordinary paper has become a kind of persecution." "The card is printed, sir. It is the same card the master of the horse gets." "The master of the horse," he said, "is not the Queen Consort of Eldermore." "No, sir, that is why the card matters." He looked at me for a while. Then he set down his own cup and he said, with what I honestly believe was regret, "You are going to be very tiresome, aren't you?" They came for Kerrick 2 days later, and they came properly, which is to say they came with paper of their own, because by then they had learned that paper was the weapon in play. A sergeant of the Escort cannot be dismissed by a consort. He cannot be dismissed by the Lord Chamberlain. He can be dismissed by a discipline board of 3 officers of the household division on a charge after a hearing. So there was a charge. The charge was conduct prejudicial to good order, that he had, by the filing of a vexatious note and by unbecoming discussion of a member of the royal family with a civilian clerk, brought the escort into disrepute. They served it on him at the water gate, in the rain. I was there. I had brought him a flask of soup, and I stood holding it like a fool while an adjutant read a paper aloud to a man who was standing at attention in a downpour. And when the adjutant had finished, Kerrick said, "Thank you, sir." And the adjutant, a decent young man, out of his depth, and I saw the moment he understood what he was doing, went red to the roots of his hair and walked away very fast. Then the door of the water gate opened, and the Queen Consort came through it. She had come down through the private garden in a coat and no hat, and she had 2 of her people behind her, and she came to within 4 feet of him and stopped, and the rain came down on all of us. "Serjeant Kerrick," she said. "Madam, you have made yourself an inconvenience." "I am sorry to hear it, madam." "Are you—" She looked him over the sodden bearskin, the darkened tunic, the water running off the brim of the sentry box behind him and drilling a hole in the gravel. "There is a very simple road out of this, and I am going to describe it to you once because I dislike waste and you are a waste. The board sits in 9 days. If before it sits, you withdraw your note of exception and sign an amended withdrawal record, an accurate one, Sergeant, one that records the king's leave, which was given verbally and which no one troubled to write down at the time, as no one ever does. Then the charge is withdrawn, and the water gate is manned by somebody else, and you go back to the escort, and in the spring I will see that you are made color sergeant, which I understand is the summit of your ambitions." The rain filled the pause. "And if I do not, madam?" "Then you will be dismissed with disgrace," she said, "and you will lose your pension, and you will be 61 years old with nothing, and no house in this realm will employ you, and every man in your regiment will be told that you were broken for gossiping about a woman. That is what they will hear, Sergeant. Not the collar, never the collar. They will hear that you talked." I will be honest, I looked away. I could not watch. I looked at the river. And I heard him say, in exactly the voice he had used at 11 at night at the top of a worn stair, without one grain more or less of anything in it, "I cannot, madam, not without the order in due form." She hit him. I want to be careful here, because that sentence sounds larger than the thing was, and I have watched the whole business be made larger by people who were not there. She struck him across the front of the tunic with the flat of her hand, an open-handed blow at the chest, the sort of thing you do to a door that will not open. It did not hurt him. It could not have hurt him. He was wearing wet wool over a leather crossbelt, and a man could hit that all day and only tire himself out. But it was a blow. It was struck by the second person in the realm against a sworn man standing his post in the rain, and it was struck because he had said asterisk, no asterisk. He did not move. He did not look at her. Water ran off the peak of his chin strap. "Madam," he said, "you are within the precinct, and there is a post book, and I am obliged to enter what occurs at my post. I will enter this. I would rather enter it as a lady losing her footing on wet gravel and putting out a hand. I am content for it to be that. But I must enter something, and I will not enter a lie." I saw her hand close. I saw her, and I have never told this to anyone, and I put it in now because it is true, and because it explains everything that happened afterward. I saw her be asterisk afraid asterisk, for 1/2 second, of a man in a wet coat with a rifle he was never going to use. She turned and went back up through the garden. He entered it as a fall on wet gravel. He had said he would, and he did, because he had given his word within 4 feet of the river. But the entry says the hour, and it says who was present, and it says Mr. T. Wren, second clerk, in attendance asterisk, and that is the third thing that exists. Now the board. I have thought a great deal about why they let the board sit at all, and the answer, I think, is arrogance. The plain, ordinary arrogance of people who have never yet been told no by any machine. She thought the board was a machine that could be pointed. It very nearly was. It sat in the old guardroom on a morning of hard frost, 3 officers behind a table with the regimental colors behind them, and Kerrick standing in front of it in his best tunic with his medals on, and me on a chair by the wall with the roll on my knees, waiting to be called and never being called. I will spare you the procedure. Here is what mattered. The charge said vexatious note asterisk, and the president of the board, a colonel with a face like a closed drawer, asked the only question that could have saved us. Sergeant, was the note true? And Kerrick said, Sir, I do not know. I said in the note that the rolls carried a qualification against the piece and that I had not seen it. That was true when I wrote it. I have since seen it. It is now a matter for the rolls and not for me. Then who does know? The clerk, sir. And the colonel looked at me, and I stood up with the great book in my arms, and I had rehearsed a speech, and it went entirely out of my head, so I did the only thing a clerk can do. I opened the book at box 41, and I carried it to the table, and I put it down in front of 3 officers of the household division, open at the page, and I stepped back. They read it, all 3 in silence, one after the other, the way men read a telegram. The colonel raised his head. Mr. Wren, is this the original entry? It is, sir. It says asterisk not crown property. Yes, sir. It says it is the personal chattel of the late Queen Isolde, devised by will to Her Royal Highness the Princess Adela. Yes, sir. And the piece has been worn in public by the Queen Consort. Yes, sir, at the winter investiture, and at the hospice gala, and at the New Year reception for the ambassadors. The colonel sat back. He looked at his 2 colleagues. And then he said the sentence that adjourned the board, and it was the first crack of light I had seen since 11 at night in December. This board, he said, is asked to break a man for filing a note that appears on the face of the rolls to have been correct. I decline to do it on a Tuesday morning with no representation from the rolls, no representation from the chamberlain, and no representation from the person who, if this page means anything, is the owner of the property. He closed the great book with both hands, gently, the way you close a book that does not belong to you. Adjourned. 14 days. Adjourned, not dismissed. Adjourned, which meant the charge still stood, and the water gate still stood, and Kerrick walked out of the old guardroom still a man under charge, into a frost so hard the gravel rang. But something else walked out with us. A question had been asked aloud in front of witnesses by a colonel, and it could not be unasked. Where is the Princess Adela? She was, at that moment, 400 miles north, in a coat that had been out of fashion for a decade, opening a fisherman's clinic in a town nobody in Harrogate could have found on a map. The Princess Adela was the king's sister. She was 62. She had opened 9,000 things in her life and had never once, so far as any clerk could discover, expressed an opinion about jewelry. She kept a working farm. She had been a serving officer of the realm's naval reserve for 22 years, and had a hand that could break your fingers if she was pleased to see you. She was known, in the household, as difficult, which in the household means does not pretend. She had also, 11 years earlier, sat every night for 4 months at the bedside of the late Queen Isolde, and had been there at the end, and had come out of that room and gone straight to a naval review the following morning because it had been arranged and people had come, and had not spoken about any of it to anybody ever since. I wrote to her. That sounds simple. It was not. A clerk of the jewel house does not write to a princess of the blood. There are 4 offices between us, and every one of those offices had by then been told, in the pleasant way such things are told, that the jewel house matter was closed and that Mr. Wren was overwrought. My first letter went into a drawer. My second went into a drawer. My third I did not send through any office at all. I gave it to Kerrick. There is a rule, he said, when I put it in his hand at the water gate. It is an old one and nobody has troubled to strike it out. A sworn man of the Escort who holds a warrant of the Regalia may make report to any member of the royal family upon a matter touching the regalia, without leave, and no officer may prevent him. How old is that rule? 400 years, near enough. It was made because a chamberlain once stole a crown and no one could tell the king because the chamberlain read the letters. He put my envelope inside his tunic. The rule has never been used in my lifetime. It has never been asterisk needed, but it exists. You will be charged again for it. I am already charged, he said. There is a great freedom in it, Mr. Wren, and I do not recommend the price. The princess came south on the night train and arrived at Harrogate at 6:10 on a black morning in February, and she did not go to her apartments. She went to the Jewel House. I was not ready. Nobody is ever ready. I had been at my desk since 5 because I had not slept, and I heard boots in the corridor, not heels, boots, and the door opened, and there she stood in a wet coat with her hair flattened by a hood, holding my letter open in her fist, and behind her in the doorway, filling it, Serjeant Aldous Kerrick, still in the tunic he had stood the night watch in. You are Wren, she said. Ma'am. This letter says my sister-in-law's collar is round Morwenna's neck. Ma'am, yes. Ma'am. Show me the book. I showed her the book. She read the marginal note standing up, with her coat dripping onto the floorboards of the Rolls room. She read it twice, and then she did something that took the strength out of my legs. She put one hand flat on the page, over the words, the way you would put a hand on the shoulder of someone you were about to leave. I never wanted the damned thing, she said. Ma'am. She left it to me and I told her not to. I sat there and I told a dying woman not to be sentimental and she laughed at me, which was the last time I heard her laugh, so it was not the worst way to spend it. She kept her hand where it was. I never wore it. I never asked for it. I said to the keeper of that day, put it in the vault and leave it there, and when there is a girl of this house who is old enough to know what she is carrying, she can have it, and I will be dead and spared the ceremony. That was the whole of my dealing with it. 11 years. She looked up, and her eyes were perfectly dry and perfectly terrible. And you are telling me that because I did not want it, and did not wear it, and did not fuss, because I put it somewhere safe and got on with my work. A woman walked into a strong room at 11 at night and helped herself to it, and has worn it in front of the ambassadors of 9 nations, and no one in this palace has said a word. One man said a word, ma'am, I said. She turned round and looked at Kerrick, who was still standing in the doorway at attention, having said nothing since he came in and having no intention of saying anything, because he had not been addressed. Sergeant, she said. Ma'am. You are on a charge. Yes, ma'am. For what? For bringing the escort into disrepute, ma'am. And how did you do that? I filed a note, ma'am. That is all. And I declined to sign an amendment to the withdrawal record, twice, ma'am. The Princess Adela stood in the middle of my Rolls room with her wet coat and her flattened hair, and she looked at that man for what felt like a very long time, and I do not know what she was seeing. I think perhaps she was seeing the whole of it, the sleet, the water gate, the printed cards, the smooth secretary, the fire in Field's office, the 11 days out of 14, all of it running backwards from a soldier standing in a doorway at 6:30 in the morning with his heels together. Sergeant Kerrick, she said, I am going to ask you a question, and I want the true answer, not the correct one. Ma'am. Why? He was quiet, and then he said the thing that I have never forgotten, and that I have repeated to every junior clerk who has ever come under my hand. Ma'am, if the roles can be changed by whoever shouts, then there is no Jewel House. There is only a room with things in it. Nobody said anything for a moment. The lamp hissed. Get me the attorney of the household, said the Princess Adela, and get me a stenographer, and get me Master Field, and get me a pot of tea, and Mr. Wren, sit down before you fall down. That day was the longest of my professional life, and I remember almost none of it in order. What I remember: the attorney of the household, a small, precise, joyless man named Rusk, arriving at 9 and being informed that a princess of the blood wished to petition for the recovery of a personal chattel from the queen consort, and going the color of paste. And then, this is the thing about lawyers, and I have loved them ever since, sitting down and doing his job. I remember him going through the roll page line by line, and asking me 11 questions I could not answer, and then telling me exactly where to go and find the answers. I remember the probate registry sending over the certified will of the late Queen Isolde at 4 in the afternoon, and the clause being read aloud, and Adela standing at the window with her back to the room while it was read. I remember Rusk saying, "The devise is absolute. The property passed on death. It has been the princess's for 11 years. The crown never owned it, the crown cannot lend it, and the king himself could not lawfully give leave for its use, because a man cannot license the use of a thing that is not his." I remember him saying, more quietly, "This is not a family quarrel. Ma'am, I must be plain with you. On these facts this is a taking." And I remember Master Ambrose Field. They brought him in at 6. He came in with his rug still over his arm, as though he had been fetched from his fire and had refused to leave it entirely, and he stood in front of the princess, and he was gray to the lips, and Rusk began, very gently, to ask him about the counter-signature on the docket. Field got through 4 questions. On the 5th he stopped, and he put his hand on the back of a chair, and he said, "Ma'am, may I say it my own way? I am 71, and I have not slept since October, and I would like to say it my own way." "Say it," said Adela. And he said it, all of it, the person who came to his house, the tea, the figure of his son's debts, the offer to buy the debts and hold them. The docket he signed knowing what the rolls said, because he had asterisked himself read the note 11 years before, and had helped to write it, and had witnessed it. The missing original from the file, which he had taken out of the drawer with his own hand and burned in his own grate, and which he had watched burn, and which had taken, he said, a surprisingly long time. He had brought the ash with him. He had brought it in a paper twist in his pocket like a madman, and he put it on the table, and he said, "That is the docket. I am sorry. I am so very sorry. It was in form. It was in form because I put it in form." Nobody spoke. Then the Princess Adela said, "Master Field, you have just ended yourself. Do you understand that?" "Yes, ma'am." "You could have said nothing. There was no proof." "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" And that old gray man, who had signed everything, who had told me to sign it too, who had hidden by his fire for 4 months while a soldier stood in the sleet at the water gate, said, "Because I saw the sergeant's post-book, ma'am. He entered it as a fall on wet gravel. She struck him and he wrote down that she had slipped. He was crying by then, quite silently, the way old men cry, without any sound or motion in the face at all. He was gentler with her name than she was with his, and I have been sitting in my warm room. Ma'am, I have been sitting in my warm room." Rusk cleared his throat and said, "That is a confession to falsifying an instrument of the household. I must caution him." "Caution him," said Adela, "and give him a chair and get him something hot. He is the only person in this building who has told me the truth without being asked twice." She turned to the window again. Outside, the frost had come down again over the courtyards, and somewhere out beyond the buildings, at the top of a river stair, a man who was still on a charge was standing his watch in the dark. "Mr. Rusk," she said, "how long?" "Ma'am, a petition of this kind the court of the household sits monthly, with the papers to prepare, the citation to serve, the answer, the—" "How long?" Rusk looked at the ash on the table. "6 weeks," he said. "Perhaps 5. "And in 6 weeks," said the Princess Adela, "there is the midwinter assembly, at which the whole realm sits down together in the great gallery under 900 lamps, and my brother's wife will walk the length of it with my sister-in-law's collar on her neck, and every camera in the kingdom will see it, and it will become hers by being seen, because that is how these things are done and always have been." She let the curtain fall. "No," she said, 5 weeks, and I want it heard before the assembly, Mr. Rusk, not after. Because I do not merely want it back." She said the next thing without any heat at all, which is why I have never forgotten it, and why I understood, for the first time, standing in my own Rolls room with cold tea in front of me, that I had been wrong to think of her as the mild party in this affair. "I want it taken off her," she said, "in front of them all." They almost stopped us. I have to tell you how nearly they stopped us, because otherwise you will think this was easy, and it was not easy, and the day it looked lost I went home and sat in the dark without taking my coat off. The counterstroke came from a direction none of us had guarded, and it came from the one person in the realm nobody could answer. It came from the king. On the 11th of March, a paper was laid before the court of the household, produced by the consort's advocate, bearing the sign manual of Alaric, King of Eldermore. It was short. It said that His Majesty had been pleased, of his especial grace, to give leave for the collar of 9 sapphires to be worn by the Queen Consort at such occasions of state as she should think fit, that the matter had been raised with him and considered by him, and that he wished it to be known that any question of impropriety was at an end. It was signed, it was dated, it was sealed. I remember Rusk holding it up to the window of his chambers to look at the watermark, and putting it down and saying, "It is genuine." "Then it is over," I said. "Yes," said Rusk. "Probably." And here is the truth about King Alaric, which I set down without malice, because I served him for 31 years and I honor him. He was 68, he was tired, he had buried a wife, and he had a household of 1,100 people, and there is not a man alive who can hold 1,100 people in his hand and also know what is going on in a strong room at the bottom of a stair. Somebody had come to him with a paper and a summary, and the summary said *a piece of the collection, an old family thing of Isolde's. Some clerk has got himself into a knot about the paperwork and it is distressing Morwenna. And he had signed, because it was the 200th thing he signed that morning, and because he loved his wife, and because a man who is asked, day after day, to end small unpleasantnesses with a stroke of a pen eventually stops asking what the unpleasantness is. He did not steal anything. He signed a paper. That is all he did, and it was very nearly enough. The board reconvened 4 days later, and dismissed Serjeant Aldous Kerrick from the sovereign's escort. Not for the note, they were too clever for that now. They dismissed him on a second charge, * making unauthorized communication with a member of the royal family *, which is to say the letter he had carried inside his tunic to the Princess Adela. And when he stood up and cited the 400-year-old rule of the Regalia warrant, the president of the board, who was not the colonel with the face like a closed drawer but another man, a smoother one, said that the warrant of the Regalia had that morning been * revoked by the Lord Chamberlain's office, and that a rule which attaches to an office cannot be claimed by a man who no longer holds it. They took his warrant, they took his post, they were within a fortnight of taking his pension. I went to find him and he was not at the water gate, because he was not anything anymore, and I found him instead in the yard behind the barracks, out of uniform, in a plain overcoat, looking like a farrier's son from a northern county, which is what he was. He had a canvas bag at his feet with everything he owned in the palace in it. "They have revoked the warrant," I said stupidly. "Yes, Sergeant. I am not a sergeant, Mr. Wren. I do not know what else to call you." He looked at the bag. "Neither do I," he said, and it was the only time in 4 months I heard the man sound old. We stood in that yard for a while. It had begun to rain again, of course. That whole spring it did nothing else. And then he said, quite suddenly, "Read me the king's paper." "I have not got it." Rusk has it. Then tell me what it says. Word for word, as near as you can. You are a clerk, you will have it. I had it. I have always had that curse. The words stay whether I want them or not. I stood in the rain in a barrack yard, and I recited the king's leave to a dismissed soldier, and when I had finished, he was silent for perhaps 10 seconds. Then he said, "It gives leave for the collar asterisk to be worn." Yes. It does not say the collar is the crown's. No. It does not say the collar is hers asterisk. I opened my mouth, and I shut it again, and I felt the whole shape of the thing turn over in my chest like a key. He gave leave to wear it, Kerrick said. A man may give leave to wear a coat that hangs in his hall. It does not make the coat his, and it does not make it the coat of the woman he lends it to. If the collar is the princess's, and the rolls say it is, and the will says it is, and the probate registry says it is, then the king's leave is a leave to wear a thing that was never his to lend. It is not a wicked paper, Mr. Wren. It is an asterisk, empty asterisk one. It gives away nothing, because nothing was ever there to give. The rain came down on the canvas bag at his feet. And it was got, he said, on a summary. Somebody told the king it was a piece of the collection. That is a false statement of the thing, made to obtain the signed manual. Take that to your lawyer. Ask him what a court does with a leave obtained on a false description. I ran. I am 58 years old, and I ran across 2 courtyards and up a flight of stairs, and I arrived in Rusk's chambers unable to speak, and I put my hands on his desk and got my breath, and I said, "The paper says worn." And Rusk, small, precise, joyless Rusk, went very still, and then said a word I shall not record, and reached for his pen. The court of the household sat on the 9th of April, in the paneled room above the chapel court, and it sat for 6 days. I will not give you 6 days. I will give you what mattered, and it is less than you think, because in the end the case was not complicated at all. That is what people never understand about the law. The great cases are usually simple, and it is only the machinery of getting them heard that is monstrous. The consort's advocate ran 3 defenses, and lost all 3. He said the collar was crown property, and Rusk produced the certified will of the late Queen Isolde, and the probate registration, and the marginal note of 11 years standing, witnessed by 2 men, one of whom was dead and one of whom was sitting in the 3rd row with a rug over his knees. He said the king's leave settled it, and Rusk stood up and said, "Sir, His Majesty's leave permits the wearing asterisk of the piece. It says not one word about title. My learned friend must show me the sentence in which the crown acquires the property, and he cannot, because it is not there. And I say further," and here he lifted the docket that Field had burned, or rather the certified copy of it that a second clerk had made in ink 4 months before, and lodged with the Lord Chamberlain's office against a green receipt numbered 4417, that the leave was procured upon a false description, namely that this was a piece of the collection, and a leave obtained by misdescription confers nothing, however exalted the hand that signed it. The king was not deceiving. The king was deceived. And he said at last, the advocate, and I felt sorry for him, because he was doing his duty with a rotten brief, that the withdrawal had been lawful, regular, and in form. And Rusk said, "Then let us look at the form." And he called Master Ambrose Field, who told the court about the tea and the debts and the grate. And then Rusk laid before the court the withdrawal record itself, the great book, carried in by 2 men, because it weighs what a small child weighs, open at the page for the 11th of December, at 11 minutes past 11 at night, at the line where a woman had signed her own name so hard the nib went through, and the ink had starred on the reverse. "There is the receipt," Rusk said, "in her own hand, received into my keeping her words and thereafter to be returned. She has never returned it. She has been asked by card. She has been asked by letter. She has been reported outstanding to the Lord Chamberlain on the 30th day, as a saddler would be reported. And she has answered by having a keeper's son's debts bought, a docket burned, a clerk threatened, and a soldier dismissed. The court asked him what he sought, and Rusk said, an instrument of recovery. I had never heard of it. Almost nobody had. The last had issued 62 years before over a set of stirrups. It is the oldest and bluntest tool the household has, and it does one thing only. It declares the title, and it commands the serjeant of the Regalia, the office, not the man, to take the piece into the hand of the crown wheresoever and upon whomsoever it be found, and to deliver it to the person the court names. And it commands every officer, guard, and servant of the household to assist him, and not to hinder him, on their oaths. The consort's advocate rose and said, with what I thought was real desperation, that there was no serjeant of the Regalia, the warrant having been revoked. And the president of the court, an old judge with a wig like a heap of snow, who had been listening for 6 days with his chin on his hand, and had said almost nothing, spoke for the first time in an hour. Revoked, he said, by whom? By the Lord Chamberlain's office, sir. Upon what ground? The advocate looked at his papers. There was no ground on his papers. There had never been a ground. There had been a telephone call. The warrant of the Regalia, said the president, is a warrant of this court and has been since before there was a Lord Chamberlain to have an office. It is not revocable at the pleasure of a household officer, and I am frankly astonished that anybody thought it was. He made a note. He made it slowly. The revocation is a nullity. The warrant stands. The holder of the warrant is Aldous Kerrick, and this court will hear no argument that he is not, and I direct that his dismissal from the Escort be referred back to the division for review on the ground that it rested upon the same nullity. He looked up over his spectacles at a room of extremely quiet people. Bring me the instrument, he said. I will sign it now, and it will be executed at the midwinter assembly in the presence of the household, since the wrong was done in the presence of the household. Let the serjeant of the Regalia attend. She came anyway. That is the part people cannot believe when I tell it, and it is the part I understand best, because I have thought about it for years. The instrument was served on her household on the morning of the assembly. She had it in her hand by noon. She knew, she must have known, what would happen if she walked the length of that gallery with 9 sapphires at her throat. And she put it on and she walked. I have decided in the end that she did not do it out of stupidity. She did it because she had never in her life met a wall she could not talk through, and she genuinely did not believe that a piece of paper and a farrier's son could be the first. She believed that when the moment came, in front of 900 lamps and the ambassadors of 9 nations and every camera in the realm, no one would dare. That is what power teaches you, and it is the last thing it teaches you, and it is a lie. The great gallery of Harrogate is 140 paces from the chapel doors to the dais. There is a strip of red carpet down the middle of it. On the night of the midwinter assembly there are chairs in tiers on both sides, and they are filled, and the lamps are lit, all 900, and the ceiling above is dark and gold, and the noise of it is the particular noise of 800 people being quiet in a way that can be heard. I stood at the foot of the dais, on the left in my black coat, with a red box under my arm. The king came in and took his place. Crown Prince Rowan sat at his right hand. The Princess Adela sat 2 chairs along, in navy blue, with no jewels on her at all, which I thought then and think now was the single most eloquent thing anyone wore in that room. And at the far end, under the chapel doors, in a gown the color of a winter sky, the Queen Consort Morwenna stepped onto the red carpet, and the 9 sapphires took the light of 900 lamps and threw it back at the room, and I heard 800 people take a breath. She had gone perhaps 30 paces when Serjeant Aldous Kerrick stepped out of the line of the escort and stood in the middle of the carpet in front of her. He was in full dress. His warrant was in his tunic. His medals were on. He carried in his left white glove a folded document with a red seal on it the size of a saucer, and he did not present it, and he did not speak, and he did not bow. He stood at attention across her road with his heels together and waited, because the form requires that the person be first given the opportunity to comply. She stopped 4 feet from him, and the Queen Consort of Eldermore in front of the court, the household, the ambassadors, the cameras, her husband, and 800 silent citizens of the realm lost her temper. I have heard people shout all my life. I have never heard anything like it, and I hope never to again, because it was not shouting so much as a sort of tearing, and it went on, and it went up, and it came out of a face that had gone from beautiful to something I could not look at directly, the way you cannot look at a burn. She called him a doorman with a rifle. She called him a farrier's brat in a borrowed coat. She said that she had made him and she would unmake him, that he would be in the gutter by Sunday, that his name would rot, that his regiment would spit when they said it. She told the gallery he was a liar and a thief, and a jealous, small, spiteful man who had persecuted her for 4 months over a trinket. She screamed at the master of the household to have him removed. She screamed at the escort, his own escort, ranged along that wall to take him. She turned in a full circle in the middle of that red carpet with her arms out, and she screamed at the room to look at him. Look at what they let stand in front of me, And then she came back round and struck him across the chest with the flat of her hand, exactly as she had at the water gate in the rain, and this time 900 lamps were on her when she did it. He stood. He did not move an inch, and he did not raise his voice, and he did not once look away from the middle distance over her shoulder, and his face, I was close enough to see it, did not change at all, not in contempt. That is what undid her, I think, in the end. There was no contempt in it and no pity either. It was the face of a man waiting for a woman to finish, because until she finished he could not do his office, and his office was the only thing in that gallery he was interested in. The noise of her went on for perhaps 40 seconds. 40 seconds is a very long time. And then it ran out, the way a fire runs out when it has burned everything, and she stood in the middle of the carpet breathing, with her hand still open from the blow. And into that ringing silence Serjeant Aldous Kerrick said, at conversational volume, in the flattest voice I have ever heard a man use, "Madam, you will stand still if you please." She said, and it is the last thing she ever said to him, "You cannot *." And he said, "I can, madam. I have the order in due form." He raised the document in his white glove, and he broke the fold, and he read it aloud to the great gallery of Harrogate. He read the title of the cause. He read the finding of the court, that the Collar of 9 Sapphires, box 41 of the Jewel House, was and had been for 11 years the sole and absolute property of Her Royal Highness the Princess Adela, by the proved will of the late Queen Isolde, that it was never crown property, that no leave of the king could pass a title the crown did not hold, that the withdrawal of the 11th of December was not a loan but a taking, and that the peace was to be recovered. And he read the command, which is 400 years old and has not one wasted syllable in it. Wherefore we require and command the surgeon of the Regalia to take the said piece into the hand of the crown, wheresoever and upon whomsoever it be found, and to deliver it to the said princess. And we require every officer, guard, and servant of this household to assist him herein, and to hinder him in no wise, upon their oaths. He lowered the paper. "Stand aside," she said. Her voice had gone to almost nothing. "Sergeant, stand aside." "I stand aside for the law, madam," he said. "It has not asked me to. The writ does not stop at a title." She turned, and this was the last card, and she played it, and I do not blame her for playing it. She turned to the dais, and she put out both hands to the king, and she said his name. Not his title, his name. 800 people looked at King Alaric of Eldermore. He got to his feet. He was 68, and he had buried a wife, and he had signed 200 papers that morning in December, and one of them had been a lie put under his hand by people he trusted. And I watched him stand up in front of his realm, and I watched him understand, completely and finally and in public, what he had signed. He looked at his wife for a long moment. Whatever was in his face, I could not read it, and I am glad. Then he looked past her, down the red carpet, at the man standing in the middle of it. "Serjeant of the Regalia," said the king, "do your office." And he sat down. There is a form for it, and Kerrick followed the form to the last comma, and I have never been prouder of a piece of procedure in my life. He did not touch her. That is the first thing and the most important, and it is written into the instrument itself. The serjeant executes upon the asterisk piece asterisk, not upon the person. He turned his head and said, "The mistress of the robes will attend the queen consort." She came, a tall, terrified woman who had been sitting in the second tier, and she crossed that carpet in front of the whole realm, and she stood behind Morwenna, and Kerrick said, "Madam, you will unclasp the collar and place it in the box. You will not hand it to me." And I stepped forward with the red box in my arms and opened the lid. I do not think the queen consort could have unclasped it herself. Her hands were shaking too badly. The mistress of the robes lifted the collar from her neck. It took some time. There are 3 catches, and the third is stiff. And the sapphires came away, and the marks of the setting were left pressed white on her skin, and she stood there in the middle of the red carpet with her hands at her sides and her throat bare, and 900 lamps on her. The collar went into the box. I closed the lid. And Kerrick, who by the instrument may take the piece into the hand of the crown and by no other hand, put his white glove flat on the lid of that box for 1 second, the taking, the whole of it, that is all the ceremony is. And then he took the box from me and turned, and marched the length of the red carpet to the dais, and stopped in front of the Princess Adela, and went to one knee, and held it up. She did not put it on, she never has. She took the box in both hands, and she stood, and she said clearly to the room, in the plain, flat, carrying voice of a woman who has spent 22 years shouting across a wet deck, "This was my sister-in-law's. She left it to me to keep for the daughter of this house, and I have kept it badly, because I thought a thing was safe if it was locked up and nobody was fool enough to touch it." She looked down at the man kneeling in front of her. "I was wrong. Nothing is safe because it is locked up. Things are safe because somebody stands where they are and says asterisk no asterisk and keeps saying it after it stops being convenient." She held out her hand, and Serjeant Aldous Kerrick took it and got up, and the great gallery of Harrogate came apart at the seams. They stood, all of them, the ambassadors, the court, the household, the 800, and they made a noise that went up into that dark gold ceiling and stayed there. And it went on for a very long time, and through the whole of it he stood at attention with his eyes forward and his heels together, because he had not been dismissed. The queen consort walked out of the great gallery alone. Nobody stopped her. Nobody had to. Here is the end of it told plainly. In the order the papers came across my desk, because that is how I know things. The court of the household referred her conduct to the law officers of the crown. She was not tried in the end. The crown does not in this realm try a consort in open court, and I have made my peace with that, but the finding of the court stood, and a finding of a taking is a thing that follows a person. The king, by instrument under his own hand, and this time read to him twice by 2 men who were not in her pay, separated her wholly from the regalia and the collection. Her name was struck from the keys. Her privilege of loan was cancelled in perpetuity, and it was published in the Gazette in 11 lines of very small type, which is the coldest thing this realm knows how to do to anybody. She withdrew to the dower house at Rothmere in May. She lives there still. She was not ruined, and she was not harmed, and she wants for nothing, and she will never again in her life be given a key to anything. Master Ambrose Field was dismissed from the office of keeper of the jewel house, and the law officers considered the falsified docket and decided, in the light of his confession, to take no further step. His son's debts were dealt with lawfully, which is to say the son paid them slowly, and it did him a great deal of good. Field lived 4 more years in a cottage with a fire in it, and he wrote to me every Christmas, and every letter said the same thing in a different way, and the thing it said was "thank you for not letting me sign it." Serjeant Aldous Kerrick was restored to the sovereign's escort by the division on review, his dismissal having rested on a nullity, with his rank, his warrant, his medals and his pension entire, and 4 months' back pay, which he did not ask for and which they made him take. He was offered promotion twice within the year. He declined it twice. When Crown Prince Rowan, who had watched the whole business from a chair on the dais and had said nothing at all, and who later told me it was the best education in kingship he ever received, asked him privately why, Kerrick said that a color sergeant sits in an orderly room and signs the roster, and that the man who signs the roster is the man everyone comes to see, and that he had found he preferred to be furniture. He said that furniture hears everything and is asked to sign nothing. He stood the water gate for another 6 years, mostly because he liked it, and the roster after that spring was drawn honestly by lot, and he drew it about as often as anybody else. And the Collar of 9 Sapphires came back down the worn stair to the strongroom at the bottom of the jewel house, on a Tuesday morning in June, in the hands of the Princess Adela herself, who put it into my hands and watched me put it into box 41 and stood there until the steel door was shut and both keys turned. Then she came up to the Rolls room with me, and she stood at my shoulder while I opened the great book and wrote the deposit entry in the ordinary way, description, marks, weight, condition, hour. And when I had finished she said, "There is one more line, Mr. Wren." "Ma'am." "Write it in the margin, under my sister-in-law's." And she told me what to write, and I wrote it, and it is there today in my hand, and it will be there when I am dead, and when the men who broke this story into headlines are dead, and when everyone in that gallery is dead, because it is in the rolls, and the rolls do not care who shouted. Recovered by instrument of the court of the household and restored to this house. Taken into the hand of the crown, wheresoever and upon whomsoever found, by Aldous Kerrick, Serjeant of the Regalia, who would not be hurried, and who could not be bought, and who said no on a cold landing at 11 at night when there was nobody watching but a clerk. I am the keeper now. I have been for 19 years. I have a warm room and a rug for my knees, and I never sit in it with the door shut. Every clerk who comes under my hand is taken down that stair on his first morning and shown the red box, and told what is inside it, and told what happened, and then I ask him the only question in this trade that has ever mattered. It is 11 at night. Somebody great is at the door, and the paper is in form, and there is nobody watching but you. What do you write in the book?